What is happening, folks? I'm going to take a deep dive into the science behind achieving fat loss and not only achieving it but maintaining it. And I think that's something that's often overlooked. When you look at the data for dietary relapse, which is people who go on a diet and achieve weight loss, but invariably at the end actually put the weight back on and are back to square one, and the data isn't good. Um, for the most part, many people relapse and don't know how to correctly reverse that and maintain their fat loss. So I'm going to be talking about how you can maintain it. Now, I'm going to talk about how to achieve it, and a lot of this has been things I've touched on in the past, but again, anybody new watching this is good information, so just take a seat and listen up. So first off, fat loss fundamentals. So when it comes to the fundamentals of fat loss, first and foremost, fat loss is predicated on an energy deficit. An energy deficit is created whenever you burn more calories than you take in. And that is done by creating a calorie deficit. So the amount of food you take in versus the amount of food that you burn. Now, listen, there's more than one way to skin this cat in this game. You can create the deficit via exercise. You can create it via doing more strength training workouts, more cardio. That is good to an end, but in the end, there's only so much you can do with strength training and cardio. There's only so much exercise you can do until your body says, do you know what, fuck this, like this is too much work. So it's a lot more sustainable to create a calorie deficit via your diet and also add in exercise. So there are some exceptions to this, of course. Now, you can actually drop body fat while eating your maintenance calories, which is obviously your total caloric intake being matched with the amount of calories you burn. And that is known as body recomposition. And you can even burn body fat while being in a small surplus in some cases. If your main goal is building muscle, as long as you're building muscle and doing strength training, you can actually do that. Now, again, it only applies to a few people, for example, beginners, people who've maybe a lot of training experience but fell off the bandwagon and haven't trained for months but get back on track and start training again, build the muscle that they lost and strip body fat. Obviously, if you're on PEDs, anabolics, steroids, you can, depending on what it is, like you can completely change the game. It completely change the landscape of what you can achieve physique wise. But this obviously is just applicable to any person who's looking, just your everyday person who's looking to burn fat. So barring those exceptions, you got to be in a calorie deficit. You got to be creating that energy deficit. And like I said, the best way to approach that is via creating a deficit via your diet and your training as well. Because that brings into the next point. In order to achieve optimal fat loss, you have to be doing a progressive resistance training or strength training program. And again, it doesn't really matter what type of program it is. It can be a powerlifting program, it can be a strength-based program, it can be more a bodybuilding program. As long as you're doing resistance training, which can also encompass body weight training, training with kettlebells, training with dumbbells, as long as you're doing that, you will maximize your fat loss and you will also prevent muscle loss, which is a key thing in really achieving optimal fat loss, because you don't want to lose weight. Again, I hate that term, losing weight. Sometimes it's appropriate to use it, but for the most part it's an outdated term because we want to lose fat. We don't want to lose weight. Weight can be muscle mass, weight can be bone mass, weight can be organ mass. So the next fat loss fundamental is optimizing our protein intake and prioritizing protein. So a good rule of thumb, which is suggested by Eric Callums, he's a great resource for anybody who wants to sort of expand their knowledge on fat loss and strength training. He recommends 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So again, if you're 100 kilogram male, you should be striving to have 200 grams of protein per day. If you are a 70 kilo female, you should have 140 grams of protein per day, and that's a good rule of thumb to follow. That will maximize your fat loss and also help you maintain your muscle and prevent muscle loss. And the fifth and final fat loss fundamental for achieving fat loss would be an appropriate volume of cardio, or an appropriate amount of cardio. Unless you are maybe an athlete or somebody who has to run and sort of have a decent gas tank, there's no real, like, from a longevity standpoint and from a sustainability standpoint, you don't really need to be going out running the roads. You don't need to be doing 5Ks. Even just going for walks, getting 10,000 steps in is all you need to help burn body fat. Again, you can, if you don't like sort of long distance cardio, like low intensity steady state cardio, which would be just walking on a treadmill or going for a long walk. You can do, of course, high intensity interval training, which is sprint training, Tabatas, where you run for 20 seconds and then you rest for 10 seconds, and you do that for, say, 10 rounds. So again, with cardio, there's more than one way to skin the cat, and it's really what boils down to what you find most convenient and also what you will stick to as well. So to get straight into it then, and also just another point there for anybody who does obviously strength train and does cardio, don't do your cardio training before you strength train. Always do your strength training before you do cardio, because doing cardio before a strength training session can actually hinder your performance whenever you go to do a strength training session. As well as that, guidelines for the amount of cardio you should do: keep the low intensity steady state, or the walking, maybe 30 minutes a day, every day. You can do that every day. You can walk every day. There's no problem there. With the high intensity interval training, like your sprints and Tabatas, keep it to 1 to 2 sessions a week, because anything more than that is probably going to negatively impact your strength training as well. So to get into how to maintain your fat loss, once you've achieved the fat loss, how do you maintain it? That's really arguably the harder thing to do. So there's been studies done on people who've been very successful with it, not only achieving but maintaining fat loss, and researchers have found several key underlying common overlapping themes with people, and it boils down to behaviours and habits and practices and even systems. These people who have achieved fat loss all seem to practice some form of cognitive restraint. Now, you might ask, what is cognitive restraint? Cognitive restraint is basically consciously deciding to restrict in some form. So obviously, first and foremost, calorie deficit, creating a calorie deficit from counting calories. That's probably the number one way that you sort of practice cognitive restraint. Another way would be if you say, for example, restrict your eating window. So you practice time restricted eating. Now, that can be intermittent fasting. It can be simply deciding, right, I'm not going to eat any food after 10 p.m, or I restricted my eating window to a 4-hour eating window, 8-hour eating window, and then after that I fast for the rest of the day. As well as that, there's points-based systems like Weight Watchers. People take the piss out of Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig. But the research has actually found that people who do Weight Watchers, a significant portion of them actually maintain their weight loss and their fat loss. So I wouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to that. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Weight Watchers myself, but I'm just purely speaking on what the data, scientific research has indicated. So practicing some form of cognitive restraint is key. Now, this is an interesting point too, and it kind of sometimes goes against what a lot of coaches would advocate. People who have maintained their fat loss all seem to regularly weigh themselves. And when you think about it intuitively, it makes sense. Like, if you're regularly tracking your weight, you're not shooting in the dark, and you are always getting feedback about like where you are, and whether you should push harder with your calorie deficit or with your training. Speaking personally, I mean, I've never really strived to lose large amounts of weight. Obviously, there's been times where I've wanted to cut weight or cut body fat just to get a bit more ripped and a bit more shredded. I would regularly weigh myself purely from the standpoint of I want to know if I'm gaining muscle. So it goes both ways as well. People who are looking to, I would say as well, for anyone who's looking to build muscle, you should regularly weigh yourself also to sort of gauge whether you are gaining muscle at an appreciable rate. And anybody that I coach whose primary goal is maximizing strength and maximizing muscle, I do say you should regularly weigh yourself. Now, more to the point about this video, people who are on a fat loss diet and whose primary goal is fat loss, you know, I have clients who weigh themselves twice a week. I have clients who weigh themselves once a week. I know for a fact there's probably clients of mine, or certainly other people who are on a fat loss diet, who probably weigh themselves nearly every day. Now, here's the thing. The scales do get a bit of a battering, like in criticism, but if you can weigh yourself every day and you're clued in and you're smart and you know that there is going to be fluctuations in weight every day due to, you know, eating food, drinking water. If you want the most accurate reading every day, first thing in the morning when you get up, after you maybe go to the bathroom, that's going to be the most accurate reading. You don't really need to weigh yourself every day, especially after eating food. But if you know and are aware of the fact that there is these fluctuations which take place on a daily basis, you're fine. You could weigh yourself every day as long as it doesn't, you know, to put it simply, rack your head, or if it doesn't negatively impact your mindset when it comes to dieting, then you're good to go, you're fine. But, you know, sort of expanding on these other practices and habits that these people have, goes without saying, you probably could have guessed that these people engage in regular exercise, you know, strength training, like I touched on earlier with achieving fat loss. They keep up the activity, they maintain not only the dieting aspect but the training aspect, and I can't emphasize that enough. Whenever you achieve fat loss, right, you don't just stop training, you keep training. Even if you actually upped your calories and gained a little bit of fat, if you keep on exercising, you keep on engaging in regular strength training, building muscle and strength, you will, like, really, I would argue, in a lot of cases, prevent any sort of fat gain, and any gains in weight that you make are probably, for the most part, going to be muscle, especially if you don't really overshoot calories. I mean, my approach sometimes with people is, whenever they've achieved the fat loss they want, we revert to a maintenance level that maintains the fat loss that they've achieved, and then from there, you know, we consolidate the fat loss, and then even after that, we can even look at building muscle and focus on building muscle and strength. So keep up the activity, keep up the training. That is imperative as well. Now, there's two other key findings from the research behind why people maintain their fat loss, and another key finding they found is that these people are often on structured programs. Now, not everybody has to be on a structured program, but it does help immensely. So a lot of people who maintain their fat loss either go to a coach, personal trainer, dietitian, certified nutritionist. Again, you can do it on your own. It can be done. It's probably a wee bit more difficult because you don't have somebody to hold you accountable. You don't have someone with professional expertise who's been there, knows the way, can show you the way. You know, but you can certainly do it on your own. It's just probably a bit more difficult. And then finally, and probably the most important point about maintaining fat loss, is these people had low recency. Now, low recency is defined as, well, I think the best way to describe it would be an example. So people with low recency, if they were offered a donut and they're on a fat loss diet, they would say to themselves, right, what do I value more? Do I value the short term feeling that I get from eating this donut, like the temporary mouth pleasure, so to speak, or do I value achieving and striving for achieving my fat loss goals? Which do I value more? And the people with low recency always value the long-term goal that they're striving for versus the short-term feeling of gratification that they get from eating the donut or, you know, whatever, pizza. So that's what it is, really. It's a big element of achieving and maintaining fat loss is having the right systems and habits in place to help you consolidate your progress and keep making more progress. And what you find is the people, if you have the right habits, the right practices, the right systems in place, not only can you achieve the fat loss and maintain it, but whenever you actually increase your calories after being in a calorie deficit and you increase your calories to, say, maintenance calories, you'll find that you will not gain an ounce of fat and you will only gain muscle. As long as you keep these habits, these key habits in place, you'll be fine, and you can actually end up eating more food in the long run. So that's the video for today. I hope it's been informative. I think really highlighting how you can maintain fat loss is so important, because people talk often about how do you get it done, how do you go from A to B, but it's so imperative that people know how to maintain it rather than just fucking getting ripped for a summer holiday or getting, you know, in really good shape for your wedding. Like, think about this, think about the long term ramifications, especially the health consequences. Obesity and being obese and being overweight is now correlated with, is now the second most correlated cause of cancer behind tobacco smoking. So from a health standpoint as well, and heart disease and diabetes, not to mention those as well. It just, you know, not only from an aesthetic point of view, from dropping body fat to look good for yourself and maybe your partner or whatever, but just from a health standpoint as well, like it's a no-brainer, like to really engage in a fat loss diet, achieve the fat loss and maintain it, and you'll feel so much better about yourself. So hope that's been informative. Thank you.